I was in a coffee shop and when I was
Hmm.
texting you, and I started walking back, and I was like, okay, I think I can do that for like 15 minutes. It's not gonna kill
Hmm.
me. So I
Yeah.
started listening into it, and it's 3 years ago,
Hmm.
more than 3 years ago. So a lot of things have changed. But it was funny to me that whenever he's arguing about the Bitcoin fees and why they're so big
Hmm.
because Bitcoin is so popular, like he's like unintentionally proving your points, the point that you're making about why you wouldn't
Yeah.
use BTC for daily payments.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And his art, I mean, just to speak very briefly on Tone Vase, his whole argumentation thing, he wants, he has it in his mind that Bitcoin is the one that's going to work. And so every argumentation point is just to win the argument. I don't think, whereas for me, like, I don't, if someone comes up with a good argument for why something else is better, I'm going to listen to them. Right. So we come from two different standpoints as far as that. But there is a certain bit of truth to the whole Bitcoin's expensive because it's popular. And there is a certain grain of truth to that, that everyone's using it, and that a lot, if when Bitcoin was not popular, it was cheap. That is true. However, what I'm looking for is something that is cheap even when it's popular. And because I want it to be popular, I want everyone to use money that no one can censor. And if everyone's using it, but it's too expensive, then no one can use it. So you kind of have to have both. And that's an interesting metric that you see on blockchains, which right now is a relatively meaningless metric because only Bitcoin and Ethereum count, but it's total fees. It's not fees per transaction, or it's all the fees that the entire network processes. Because if you had a million people spending crypto every day, that would be, let's just say for 1 cent per transaction, that's like a million cents. I'm too stupid to do the math really quickly right now, but at least that would be a large total fee number, even
Yeah.
if the per transaction is best. Now, I think that the Bitcoin and Ethereum fees, the total fees spent, if they didn't have to spend that much, are, that's just the upper limit of how much people are willing to spend, but that's not how much people would prefer to spend if they had alternatives. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
I mean, when you talk about this popularity thing, that was
Hmm.
his argument on this discussion. And by the way, I'm completely on your side when it comes to this
Hmm.
debating thing, man. People ask me to have people on the channel to debate against them, and I'm like, dude, I won't debate anyone ever. Like
Hmm.
that's just a waste of time, right? If you're just trying to push your point of view on top of someone, like the
Hmm.
most interesting conversations just happen when you're like yes and not no but. It's like
Hmm.
completely different way of building things. I'm
Yeah.
with the popularity argument as well. You would
Hmm.
think that if something gets worse, the most popular it gets, like that's it should be pretty obvious that it's not sustainable, right?
Yeah. It's funny. There's an expression that's like, no one goes there anymore. It's too crowded.
Oh, okay.
You know,
I get.
of course, which is kind of ridiculous because it can't be crowded if no one goes there anymore. But
Right.
it is true that there are some places or some things that are too popular for their capacity, and but then there's competition. It flows off over to other competitors. Like if there's only one bar in town and it's too popular, no one wants to go there because everyone's there, and you open up a second bar, then a lot of those people who would prefer to go to the first bar if it had the capacity now go to the second bar, and that's the way it works.
And that's the difference within like virtual things and physical things, right? Like
Hmm.
if I'm a headphone maker and
Hmm.
I have way too many orders, that can crash my business. Whether if I'm doing
Of
YouTube
course.
videos, it doesn't matter if 1,000 million people come here, like they can still come and enjoy the
Hmm.
experience that I'm selling them. Well, and since you mentioned the bar metaphor, that leads
Hmm.
us to like very naturally to hard forks. And
Hmm.
it's good to mention for people that are watching this that are not very aware of what Dash is, that
Hmm.
Dash actually started out as a fork of Bitcoin, right?
Yes.
Can you speak a bit about the history of Dash and how it comes to be what it is currently?
Yes. So before I go into that, I have to, for the for the viewers at home, as they say, there's two different definitions that people say when they say hard fork. there's two things that they're actually talking about that are a little bit different. One is a code base fork, which means you take the code, you copy it, and make changes to it. And there's another one which is a chain split, like a chain fork, which is you actually take not just the code but also the transaction history of the entire chain, and then you split it off. And so, for example, uh, when it's kind of the difference between, like, let's say you have a political party, and then you have two different opinions in that political party, and you cannot reconcile the differences, and then the party splits into two. That would be a chain split, right? But then the other hand, a fork would be just a regular old fork. Would be, you look at a different political party, you copy their constitution and their founding principles and make some changes and start your own political party from zero. That's kind of more what Dash did, right? It's not, it didn't used to be Bitcoin and then became Dash. It was always Dash from the beginning. Or more importantly, it was founded early 2014 by Evan Duffield, who's a man from Arizona, a developer. And it was first called Xcoin for like a week or something. It was a very, very short period of time. And that's because it was it pioneered the X11 hashing algorithm, which is used kind of 11 different hashing algorithms together to make a better, more decentralized, supposedly mining thing. But over a course of time, that always turns into professional ASIC mining machines anyway. So it started as that. And then it was originally forked from the Litecoin code base. And Litecoin had a inflation bug in the beginning. Coin was created on the first day, the supply curve, rather than being like smooth, goes straight up for a little while and then over. And so Dash inherited this bug and had something, and it was a little bit more dramatic because of some different changes, such as the difficulty adjustment algorithm. And so a big bunch of coins got created on the first day. They fixed it, they patched it because the founder had a full-time job. And so he was at work running on his other computer trying to put out the fires over here while he's like at work. And so that got fixed. And then within a few, I guess a few weeks, a few months, the coin was rebranded to Darkcoin because the after the initial like hashing algorithm, like let's just experiment with a coin and see if this new hashing algorithm works. They decided, okay, why don't we make something valuable? Why don't we actually do something cool and provide an extra privacy function to what is otherwise basically like a Bitcoin fork? And oh, by the way, I didn't mention that Dash was originally forked from Litecoin, but because Litecoin had no development really going on at the time, or very little, then including this bug that ended up being a big pain in the ass, then it was reforked from Bitcoin. So it started as a Litecoin fork, but then they just switched it to be more of a Bitcoin fork. So that's the way it is today. And so
You wouldn't even
yeah.
think of, just as a caveat there, you wouldn't even
Mhm.
think of like the founder of a big project that's like making waves in the space having a
Mhm.
full-time job in another thing right now, right? Like that's
Yeah.
completely unconceivable 7 years later.
Yeah, and it was a, early days type thing. A lot of that was the same thing in the early days, but it's also Evan Duffield is a little bit different from Satoshi Nakamoto in that Satoshi planned something out pretty meticulously, thought of his own anonymity, for example, to for security reasons, etc., and started this big revolution. Whereas Dash's founder in the very beginning was kind of just experimenting. He was playing around. Didn't expect this to be, a major thing in the beginning, but later that ended up happening. And so Dash became Darkcoin and focused on uh, coin mixing, which is it's something you can do on any cryptocurrency, any Bitcoin based chain, especially where like you take your money with the money of a bunch of different people, and I'll put it in the same pile, mix it together, and get the same amount back. But you might have that person's $5 bill or that person's $20 bill. So basically, no one can tell where the money came from when you send it. And so
Right.
just a
So
basic,
basically, the
yes,
way I think of mixing is like throwing a tomato in a salad. You just mix it up
yeah,
and pick the next tomato you find that you never know
yeah,
which one you
that's
took.
exactly the way it works. And the difference with Dash is, for a long time, people had a problem trusting whoever's doing the mixing. And a lot of times it was a centralized company or something like that, or something that the government could then spy on or seize or something. But Dash built it into the actual protocol itself. And so that was like the first big thing. But then over time, they started, it was like, well, now that we've created a basically a Bitcoin copy, except with a one of the serious issues with Bitcoin, which now people are starting to realize. Back then, people still thought Bitcoin was anonymous. Uh, After they fix that, saying, well, let's fix other things. Like right now, it's cheap to run a Bitcoin node, but one day it'll be expensive. So let's make a incentivized node called a master node that then people you can actually get paid to run part of the network. Just like with miners, if you run that part of the network, you get paid. But if you run a non-mining node, you don't get paid. And so it was basically to fix that problem. And a whole bunch of different coins use master nodes today, or some kind of other incentivized node. And then it became okay. Well, we're working for free as developers, or we're relying on a foundation, the Dash Foundation, with people donating to it to try to get things funded. And this doesn't work out that well. Let's create a protocol level development funding mechanism called a treasury that basically means that now everything that you need to do to run the entire project is self-sustained, self-paid for by the network itself.
I'm I mean, with the mixing thing in particular,
Hmm.
since we stuck for a bit in there, and something that sticks with me is that Dash has this privacy angle that some
Hmm.
people try to push and some people don't try and push. Some people
Hmm.
might think it's more important in the chain and some don't. And in general, I think that those disservice, at least in the point of view of people that are not diving deep into Dash, but just
Hmm.
those that are in the ecosystem and are sort of aware of it. I think that just creates a little contradiction that makes us feel, as people again that are not very deep
Hmm.
into Dash, like there's an internal contradiction going on in there.
Yeah.
Would you care to explain why that is?
Yes, there's definitely a disagreement on messaging on this case. And as usual, it's because the reality of a situation is more complicated than you would want to say right away. So
Mhm.
first off, the concept of privacy is there's different levels to this, and there will be some people that try to talk about this as a binary thing. It's either private or it's not, and that's not exactly true. Definitely not. So for example, the Dash blockchain, just like the Bitcoin blockchain, all that is entirely transparent. Anyone can see any transaction happening at any time. They don't need any special permissions. It's all very public. And Bitcoin, of course, is pseudonymous, meaning it's not anonymous, but you don't know that necessarily the people who are behind each transaction, and Dash is the same. Now, the difference is it's very easy to trace Bitcoin transactions. And so, what Dash's privacy thing does is it, and by the way, this exists on Bitcoin as well, but it's not in the protocol itself. People use wallets like, say, the Samurai wallet or the Wasabi wallet or other things like that to provide these additional layers of privacy. But basically, all it does is you can see the entire blockchain, but when you mix funds and you send a payment, no one knows where that came from. And that basically breaks what they call the transaction graph, or the breaks like the chain of transactions, so that, for example, if I pay for my coffee, someone the company that takes the coffee doesn't look back, see how much money I have, and then later, next time I come in, hire someone to rob me, for example, or charge me more money because they think I'm a rich person or something. And so it's basic privacy, which I think no one is going to use anything that doesn't have this, right? The only reason that people are still using other things without it is because they don't realize how much information they're leaving out there, and there's not enough thieves that have figured out how to do this to harass people. Now, so basically, if I use this functionality correctly, no one can tell where pretty much no one can tell where I'm sending my money, or if I receive it, no one can tell where I got it from. Now, the things that are not hidden are like everything else. So, for example, if I have an address and someone sends me money privately, no, they don't know where it came from, but they do know that I have this money, that I received it. And then if I then mix it and I send it out, they know that I mix and sent out. They don't know where I sent it, but then they know I sent it out. And so, for example, what happens if I steal all your money, which I would never do because you seem like a nice guy. And also, it's just crime is very difficult. Crime is very
And
difficult
also
to
be
pay for.
and also
Yeah.
because right now it would be very easy for me to say it was you.
Yeah. So if I steal all your money, let's just say for argument's sake, it's like 100 dash. It's only 100 dash, right? And then so it gets stolen, it gets mixed, and then you kind of figured out where you think the hacker or me is. You think, okay, a US based IP address. And then on Coinbase, 100 dash that was mixed just shows up. I'm trying to sell it. It's like, okay, everyone knows what's going on here. Like,
Yeah,
it's pretty easy to see like the disappear. And that doesn't mean it's not private, of course. It doesn't mean that you can try does not mean you can't trace the transactions. But so there's other cryptocurrencies, like let's just say Zcash, for example. When you're using encrypted privacy methods, you cannot see what's going on at all, really. You cannot see, I mean, obviously this is a optional thing for Zcash, so there are some transparent transactions, but if you're using the anonymity function, it just you can't see any of it. And so basically the purposes are very different, right? Some people who are trying to operate completely anonymously would want something stronger, right? They want, well, not stronger, but something that obscures everything. So you just can't see anything. Now, people like, let's just say like me, who just lives off of crypto, I don't mind that, like the company that pays me or whatever, or who like that they can see that there's money going in and out. I don't mind that people I don't mind that some things are out there. I just don't want people to know how much money I have, where I got it from, where I'm spending it. It's like
right.
a consumer grade versus like a hacker grade type privacy. And those are very different purposes. And so Dash does the first, which, and so does Bitcoin. So does Bitcoin. Well, not protocol level, but there's tools out there for this. So does Bitcoin Cash. So do a lot of different things have that consumer grade privacy, which I think is a very basic requirement for anyone using this stuff. Like if you swipe your credit card, no one knows who you paid. The company that took your payment doesn't know how much money you have left in your account. Like all this is just not shown. Of course, if the government or the bank, they all know everything. But so that's a basic requirement for anyone using things. Now, completely anonymous, no one can tell who paid what, anything like that. No one can see any of the money. That's not something that everyone needs. I do argue that that's very valuable, by the way, but it's not the same category. So what happens is regulators, first off, I don't believe regulators should be banning or putting pressure on either of these things, but they are categorizing Dash in the second category with things like Zcash when it should be in the first category of things like Bitcoin. So some people in Dash have been trying to communicate this, that's saying, no, we're not a privacy coin. We're in this first Bitcoin like category. We just have more efficient features of doing this in order to avoid mischaracterization, because you want people to understand what you're actually about, but also because you don't want to get delisted off of exchanges. Let's be honest. That's the big thing. And then there's other people that don't necessarily disagree with that, but they strategically say we shouldn't tell people we're not about privacy because we are. We shouldn't lose track of what we actually use because it's an important part of who we are. So there's just a messaging disagreement on that whole complex situation. That's kind of what you see.
One thing that you say that really stuck with me is
Hmm.
the fact that there are not people improving the technology here, and that is the technology to obscure your balances to
Hmm.
everyone, your
Hmm.
overall transaction history every time you send a transaction, because there are not enough people with malicious intent trying to take advantage of that. So
Yeah.
in that kind of way, you kind of need like the negative adoption to fuel the
Hmm.
positive adoption in one way, which is something that I never thought about. That's
Yeah.
an excellent point.
And the one thing this is going to be very interesting to see how this turns out, because uh, Bitcoin, Dash, all those kinds of currencies work on the UTXO model, which, to be super, because I don't really like to talk about it in a complicated way anyway, but to be super easy on this, it's like cash. Like I have $20, and if I want to pay you $10, I have to send you $20. You send 10 back, and then now I have a 10. Or then maybe I have a five. Maybe I have a five and four ones and some change. I have to send you the five, four ones and some change, and they could all be in different addresses, for example. And so that's the way Bitcoin things like that work. Whereas stuff like Ethereum and Nano, for example, those are the two that come to mind, have a account-based model where it's just one address and a balance. So if for anyone who's ever used cryptocurrency with any more than like literally once, you have to create you're supposed to create a new address for every payment. Now, for Ethereum, that's not the case at all. You have one address and that's it. So everyone who you send money to can see your entire balance, all the money you have at any one time. And that's pretty crazy if you think about it. Like it just, and Bitcoin used to work this way a little bit where people just had one address usually. And at some point you started getting a new address every time. But that's something that's crazy because people are using like, oh yeah, they buy like you buy an NFT for this much money, and then the person you bought it from can say how much money you have, and sometimes it's a hell of a lot of money, and then that then they kidnap you and like hit you over the head with a baseball bat until you give them all your money. Like that's I can't believe that people are still not caring about privacy on that basic sense because it's a huge security risk. It's just like wearing a jacket of all your money, just like pasting dollar bills, just walking around showing people how much money you have. That's crazy.
Right, or like having a credit card that says I'm rich on it,
Yeah.
or not,
Can you
or I'm
imagine?
poor. But in any case,
Yeah. Can you imagine a credit card that had a little electronic display on it that showed your account balance?
yeah, that
That would be
wouldn't
crazy.
that would have been nice. But back in like a little
Hmm.
side story here, in Argentina we have a different two different rates of exchange. So one is the
Hmm.
official dollar rate, and then there's a parallel dollar rate. And when I
Hmm.
got here, the difference was like now it's almost double. Like
Mm.
$1 in the black market would go twice as long as $1 in the official market. So, but somehow Western Union works with the unofficial rate.
Hmm.
So I was unaware of this, and someone sent me a payment through Western Union, and man, did I feel sketchy leaving that Western Union with the bag full of money. And everyone
Yeah.
online saw me get like. And by the way, the bills have not catched up with inflation, right? So
Hmm.
you have $5, but the stack of bills is like this, and
Yeah.
I mean that's scary, and that's like the crypto equivalent. Justin
Yeah, of course.
Neckenhofer, he was also talking about how in DeFi, thanks to these
Hmm.
things, then people can give you different insurance rates given on how rich you are, on who you
Hmm.
transacted with, and everything. So this is effectively like building systems for surveillance.
Hmm.
And one thing that I'm asking everyone these days is when you mentioned privacy coins
Hmm.
and privacy by default, you went straight to Zcash, and I find that Zcash is getting less and less relevant every day. I think that
Mm.
Monero is somewhat displacing it. But do you think this is just something that with the people that have been here for a long time, Zcash just sort of stuck with you guys, or
Well, there's a couple of different things. First off, I'm not an expert in this area, but from what I understand, what I am most interested in for privacy technology is a coin called Firo, which used to be called Zcoin, not Zcash, because they just are in the process of implementing something called Lelantus, which is a really interesting way of completely erasing transaction history every time you send. And I mean, I do know that a lot of like for example, some people who are working on research for Monero in the past are working now for Firo. So there seems to be some little bit of a movement that way. But so Monero is a little bit of an older technology on that thing, and I kind of view so if I would say like Ethereum is the zero privacy, right? And then Dash or Bitcoin Cash with mixing would be the one level. I would kind of consider Monero to be like a 1.5 because the way it does transactions is a little bit different. So, for example, with zero knowledge proofs and like Zcash and stuff, every and obviously there's people who are way more technical. They're going to lose their minds right now. You're such an idiot. You don't want okay, whatever. But basically, you encrypt the transaction completely. Now, what Monero does is it does through a decoy method, where if I send you money, I send money to 5 or 6 different people. And one of those is the true person, but you don't know which one. And there's some special keys that allow us to see that. And so you can see everything, but it's obscured because you don't know which one's the real one. And there have been a few different errors and bugs over the years that have found this out, that they've been able to deduce which one it was. For example, at one point they say, hey, if someone sends you a payment of all these ones, it's a much higher likelihood that the most recent payment is the real one than the older ones, because it sends like 5 decoys. And there was recently, I think this was just like last week, or it
Last
was like
week, I know which one you're about to refer
yeah,
to. Definitely last week.
it of a specific wallet implementation that if you sent it right away, if you received a payment and sent it right away, there was a high likelihood that they could find out which one was your payment. Again, not 100%, but high. And so if you waited like about an hour, then you could send it and it would be a lot safer. And at the same time, do you remember all those Monero forks that happened, the chain splits that happened like a year or two ago?
I started getting. Oh, okay, this is relevant. So I'm gonna sidetrack a
Yes.
bit, but like, this is
Yes.
relevant because I didn't know that much about privacy coins, and I got
Mm-hmm.
very interested in Firo in particular. So
Mm-hmm.
I invited Ruben Yap on this podcast, and he was
Good guy.
great, great guy, one of my favorite guests of all time,
Mm-hmm.
and me, very innocently, I took that episode and I posted it on the subreddits of all the privacy coins. Big mistake, because the Monero
Because the
people
Monero
really don't like this.
yeah.
They really didn't like it. It's like they're very purist, and of course, because Firo had a pre-mine, and they
Mm-hmm.
just didn't go through their whole checklist of what a coin should do, which is like something that it can be argued both ways. You can argue why it should and why it shouldn't, or why.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit of history in that too. That's very recent, by the way. Because if you had done this about a year ago, there would have been still a negative response, I think, but less negative response. It's just that in the last couple months, some old school Monero people moved over and started working for Firo, and they're upset about that, as well as the Monero forum funding system, like the way they crowdfund money for development projects. So one of the guys copied that over for Firo and like literally copied it completely, and possibly while he was still working and getting paid by Monero. And so people are really upset at that. So there's a reason why this is so hostile today.
And that was just what I was about to say. And
Hmm.
the good thing about this is like the whole thing caused such a big mess on Reddit for like about
Hmm.
23 hours that Big Sharma from Cake Wallet offered to come on the podcast and talk about
Hmm.
Monero and why these
Hmm.
things caused the problems that it did. So in the end, everything just followed a very positive line, and that episode with Big Sharma from Cake Wallet was also
Hmm.
brilliant. In
Yeah.
the I mean, we strayed away from the point a little bit. Would you mind going
Hmm.
back to why this and not Zcash, or is Zcash the level
Yeah.
two?
Yeah. So Zcash and probably Firo would be more in the level 2 category where it's a little bit more complete. Uh, there was, as I mentioned about the chain splits, that was another thing with Monero where a few different coins, when they changed the hashing algorithm, split off. Just like there was like a Monero or O, like a Monero original. There's a few different, you know, I would call them kind of shit coins. Just they didn't go anywhere, but there were still forks. And what was found out is if you claimed your coins on when there's a split, like say Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, all that, and it's all on the same wallet, and but you specifically claim your forked coins. I'm sure you remember doing that process. And so if you did that with Monero and Monero's forks, if you claimed coins on another chain, it would reveal what are your real coins on the Monero chain and destroy your privacy. And so, and more importantly, if because of the big anonymity set out there, if enough people on every person that claimed their coins on the other thing didn't just harm their privacy, they harmed the entire privacy of every Monero user. So if let's say the let's just say half the Monero users claimed their free airdrop coins or whatever they want to call their forked coins, then that would significantly like rule out a whole bunch of fake addresses out there and make the entire pool of possible payments and stuff very much smaller and make it Monero as a whole much less private unless you did some extra kind of things. So, and these are none of these are like particularly bad on their own. It just each one of these kind of showcases that the decoy model is a difficult model to keep 100% private all the time. And I think that eventually, I believe personally, that Monero is going to move away from the decoy model eventually, just because it's kind of like sort of like coin mixing in that it's complicated to get everything done, and it's much easier to do something like say Lelantis that Fiero does, or zero knowledge proofs, for example.
In the I mean, in favor of that argument,
Hmm.
like you say, every time that something happens with Monero, it's always
Hmm.
because someone managed to find something in the decoy model. And this
Hmm.
was what Ruben was saying. In the end, you have to move away from that model because it's precisely the way that you're approaching things.